really gave a superb class in radiochemistry, and you had to blow your own detector. Yeah, you had to blow the glass for your own detectors.
I feel around with that a little. Same time that this one was taken. Or was it, yeah. I wonder if anybody got into health physics knowing such a thing even existed at the time they started.
What, as risk?
No, as,
As health physics.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I certainly didn't. Died from surgery.
Oh, that's
AV canal, complete AV canal surgery.
I was wondering where you're. Good afternoon. I'm Sidney Porter, representing the Health Physics Society History Committee, and it's my distinct pleasure to be able to interview a colleague, an old friend, a superb health physicist, by the way, who is an early member of the Health Physics Society and has been elected a fellow of the society, and also has taken his board exams and is a board certified health physicist, better known as a certified health physicist. Now, Bill, you want to tell us about your early days and how you got into health physics? And I believe you have some pictures to show us of you as a young man.
Well, I have a few pictures. Actually, this whole thing is a story about, it's sort of like thermalization of a neutron or an accidental path of some way. I was born in western Pennsylvania, in Uniontown, and grew up mostly in Monessen, Pennsylvania, and in Florida, Hollywood, Florida. Graduated from Monessen High School. Have one early picture of me. I don't have very many pictures around. I usually don't keep them out for obvious reasons. Went to Penn State with an NROTC scholarship. Started out in chemical engineering, had it partially decided for me that I didn't want to be a chemical engineer, and shifted to liberal arts after 2 years. Graduated in 1957 with I had a science major, history minor, a math minor, and a political science minor, but they wrapped it up and called it arts and letters. Went off to the Navy with an arts and letters degree. I hit the destroyer by the name of the USS Sigourney in the summer of 1957. And found myself assigned to the engineering department. This sort of surprised me because I thought I was going to be in the operations department. It seemed that some yeoman, secretary in the Navy office at Penn State, had not bothered to change my records from engineering to liberal arts, so I wound up in engineering. First job was as damage control assistant, which involves nuclear, biological, and chemical defense work. So they sent me up to school at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia, and I took 6 weeks of study on nuclear, biological, and chemical defense. After another year or two on the destroyer, I was assigned to Fort McClellan, Alabama, where the Navy has its school in nuclear, biological, and chemical defense for shore installations. At that time it was there. I don't think it exists anymore. In fact, I don't think Fort McClellan has that school anymore. That's sort of irrelevant. They gave me some time to read, and I decided I liked the radiation protection issues, and tried to move that way in the Navy. I was informed that there wasn't any way I could do that except to revert back to being an ensign. At that time I was a lieutenant. I had a wife and 2 children, and didn't figure I could afford being an ensign again, so I wound up leaving the Navy. I had to go serve on another ship before I could get out. I was on the Okinawa. Had the pleasure of being a plank owner on that ship. It's a helicopter carrier. Wound up being involved in the Cuban missile issue. That when President Kennedy gave his famous speech, I was sitting off about 90 miles from Guantanamo, south of Haiti. We were ready to go in to take out any of the U.S. people that, that they wanted out of Guantanamo if things got out of hand. I left that ship in May of 1963, went to the University of Rochester.
And what made you go to the University of Rochester?
Well, I'd applied to most of the other schools, and they felt with some justification that my math background probably wasn't strong enough, and My overall undergraduate grades weren't very good. I should point out I was valedictorian of a high school of 200 people, but when I went to Penn State, I decided other things were more interesting. I was working 3 jobs. I was making 6 or 7 dates a week, you know, with a little. But it took me a couple of years to get over the freedom issue, getting away. But at any rate, the University of Rochester was the only one that offered me admission. Dr. Stannard was kind enough to allow me to come there, provided initially it was going to be a tuition fellowship. But when we finally got there, I don't think he ever thought we'd come without any more of support. But my wife was a registered nurse, an operating room nurse, and she figured, well, I can support us while he goes to school. So we went up there. They found a fellowship for me there. Did their what they called a Plan B scholarship at that point, where a degree where you don't do a thesis, you just take the coursework and do a pseudo study project. I did a project with solid state dosimetry, which involved both film badges and early TLDs, the powder type TLDs, radiophosphorescent. Yeah, illumination dosimeters, the kind of service used in the DT-60 personnel dosimeters, things like that. And
Well, how was Newell? How did Newell get you through this program? Tell me about his influence.
well, the mere fact that he allowed me in there in the first place, he could be entirely justified in not doing that. And he was my initial advisor. When I got working on the solid state things, I went to working with Herb Meermagen, who was the professor of health physics and the health physicist for the department. He was one of the few full professors that I've known, Ken Miller here at the Hershey Medical Center being another, who got to be a full professor without having a doctoral degree. That his degree was from Germany someplace, I don't remember anymore. But at any rate, I left Rochester, went to work for Applied Health Physics, a consulting firm in Pittsburgh, run by Bob Gallagher. Worked with them for about 8 months. Most of the time then, most of that work was in connection with TLD dosimetry and film badges and a few other things. I got involved with surveys. And, excuse me, I dry out real quick. I did a lot of different things there, nuclear laundry, surveys of norm facilities and such things. I think that was probably responsible, together with the big course that the Baltimore Washington chapter put on. I left, just to go back a step, when I left Applied Health Physics, I went to the Public Health Service.
Why did you leave Applied Health Physics?
The company was having financial problems. We didn't have enough work to keep us, fully and gainfully employed, and they couldn't really afford the number of people they had. My immediate supervisor at Rochester was Bob Augustine. Dr. Augustine had been in the Public Health Service before he came to Applied Health Physics as technical director. He made some contacts in the Public Health Service. One thing led to another, and I was commissioned in the Public Health Service in 1966. My 6 years of Navy time counted, and it worked out very well. I was able to count that service time.
That's good. Now, when did you take? Did you take a BHP prep course?
I took the 32-week course, I think it was at the time, that the Baltimore Washington chapter gave, and that would have been in winter of '66, '67. I took the exam in '67, was certified in '68.
You must have taken the second or third year of Gibbon then.
Might have been. I think my number was 67-7
and I
or
put
8.
it together in '66.
Huh. I didn't realize that. I knew Triplac was involved with it. I really didn't know.
Yeah, well, I wrote it. He published it.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it went. But anyway, the thing is that you took it and you passed the first time around.
Right.
Well, you're a very bright person. Most people don't. Not back in those days.
Well, I happen to have, to a certain degree, a reasonably good short-term memory. I was able to pack a lot of stuff in there and remember enough of it. I've made a very, very strong point of making sure I had enough recertification credits every year, every time since. And I wouldn't have to go back and take all that again because I'm not really up to
It's much tougher now than it used
learning
to
that.
be,
Yeah,
too.
I know it's tougher and it's in two different sections and all that sort of thing. I was working for in environmental radiation for the Public Health Service. Bob Augustine had come back to the PHS and wound up being my immediate supervisor. And it was one of those situations where I'd come up with an idea and I'd pass it up the line. I said, well, let's let Dr. So-and-so take a look at it and see what he thinks. And I was thinking, gee, why don't I take a look at it? Why am I not the person taking a look at it? So I put in to go for out of the service training, the Public Health Service. They told me I better do it right away because it'll be several years before they'll take you. I was again very fortunate. They sent me back to Rochester for my doctorate the first time I applied.
Wow.
And I went back there.
And that was when? What year did you go back to Rochester?
It would have been 1968. I went to Rochester. I was then working on a PhD in radiation biology, so I sort of involved from health physics into radiation biology, and then, as we'll see later, back into health physics.
Well, they both are intertwined.
I know they're heavily intertwined. I was more deeply into the biological end of radiation for a long time than I was in the physical end of it. But I went to Rochester in '68. I stayed there to '71, finished up all the necessary coursework.
And what was your major thesis?
Major thesis was in the effects and characterization and effects of Krypton 85 on animals, which I did a lot of basic things like solubilities and transfer coefficients and pharmacokinetics, how the gas was taken up into animals and then desaturated from them. We did some LD50 studies with it by inhalation. That was done after I left Rochester, but before I got the degree.
I remember you gave one of the major papers in the Noble Gas Symposium. I don't remember exactly when that was, late 60s maybe? Early 70s?
It was the Noble Gas Symposium in Las Vegas. And that would have been 71 or 2.
Because at that time, all the nuclear power plants in the country were really anxious to learn how to measure radionoble gases better. And your paper was one of the ones that kept coming up when we did literature searches. That's why I was so anxious to go to that meeting, Bill, so I could hear your paper, believe it or not.
Well, I'm flattered. The initial part of that Krypton study was an aggregation of all the literature that I could find on the subject. And it wound up, my thesis was in 3 separate pieces or 4 separate pieces. The first piece was, when it was finally published, the first package was the literature survey, and then there was the pharmacokinetics, and then there was the lethality. So it was put in several different pieces. But, that paper got translated into Japanese. I was very, very flattered as what was it, Krupitan, I think they had. That was how they called Krypton in the title. Let's see, what happened then?
Well, the thing is that your PhD was thesis was accepted, the work that you did, and you got your actual PhD
in 1974. I did the last couple of years. I was working in absentia. I had all the coursework done and the qualifying exams done. The service really would have preferred not to pay for me to be there full time, so I was transferred to the laboratory in Montgomery.
And what were you doing in the Montgomery laboratory? Tell me about that.
Well,
that's real health physics.
Well, it was still Krypton research. We set up a laboratory there where we could do both the internal.
Was Abe Goldman there at that point?
I don't think so. I know they knew Abe, but I don't think he was there at the time. Charlie Porter had just become the director of the
Lab
place.
director.
I was working in the bioeffects branch, I think it was called, with Jim Everts was doing work on with microwaves on Chinese hamster cells, actually cheek pouch on Chinese hamsters, and I set up my Krypton project there. Perhaps you may remember the Public Health Service had developed a system for taking radionuclides out of milk, in which they used huge refrigerated tanks. These were 18 feet long by 8 feet in diameter. And they succeeded in taking all the radioactive material out of milk, and you had a white chalky material that was done that looked like milk, but no one really could recognize it as milk, so that sort of went away, and they had these big tanks sitting there, and I said, well, I can get an infinite cloud for krypton beta, one of these tanks. So we put airlocks in the one end of them, put a vinyl lining, so we wouldn't have a bunch of brimstone from the modern energy beta from the krypton banging into the stainless steel walls, put a bicycle chain support system down the middle of the tank. And the animals were exposed in wire baskets that were hanging from that chamber. They had about 99% of an infinite cloud dose. So we did lethality studies on guinea pigs, rats, and Chinese hamsters.
Yeah, it's too bad University of Michigan did all the calibrations, all the early noble gas calibration things had too small a chamber for Krypton 85.
Yeah, Jim Martin got me working on some of this stuff actually. One of the earliest chambers that I used was still in Rockville before I went to Rochester, was a weather balloon. We were calibrating dosimeters to krypton, and we blew up a weather balloon to about 12 feet or so in diameter and put the TLDs into the middle for a while. One of the things we found out is that krypton, along with other noble gases, goes through latex balloons very rapidly. So we weren't able to keep it in too well. In fact, I did an experiment a little after that where I put the krypton put two balloons concentrically, put krypton in the inner balloon and measured the air that was in the outer balloon, and we could start seeing krypton in the outer balloon within an hour or two of it.
Yeah, heavy mylar is a much better.
Oh yeah.
But it turns out even after a while, yeah, heavy mylar, after a week or two, the noble gas starts to make it through there. And believe it or not, in the work that's been done in radon measurements over the last 20 years or so, they've had to give up every single plastic known to man. They've tried all these space-age plastics, and after a week or two, they all seem to leak a little. So guess what? They're back to thin stainless steel, where we started from all those years ago. And I hate to think the tens of thousands of dollars that these people have spent in this.
Yeah, I forgot to mention when we went by it, while I was in Rockville, we being Henry Reck and Roger Schneider, and I developed a TLD system that used cleaved lithium fluoride crystals of about centimeter squared and about a millimeter thick, and did individual photon counting of the photons being emitted from the TLD. And we were able to get a system that, as I recall, gave about 10,000 counts for every milligram of exposure. And we used those on, they were used on studies that were done as part of the next study, where they,
Now, when was that,
next study.
roughly?
This was 67, thereabouts. We packaged some of them up and sent them to Corral along with other
Did you
dosimeters.
publish that? I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, it was published. I wasn't the first author on it, but it was published.
Because the Royal Naval College in London, Greenwich, England, redid that work with the thin crystals. They redid the whole thing, and when TMI came along, they very proudly sent me these 30 or 40 thin cleaved crystals, one on top of another, as a long range beta dosimeter that, quote, they had developed, not knowing that you had done it. It sounds like 15 years earlier.
We used them around West Valley when One of the public health service people was up there doing environmental monitoring around
Did you do any
there.
beta response there?
Yeah.
To those? Because that's what they couldn't find, the Brits couldn't find in the literature. Well,
We used it was a like a 2 crystal package. One of them had maybe, I don't really remember exactly, 3/16 or so of plastic on top of the crystal, and the other one had a mylar, aluminized mylar over it. So we were able to get both. And that's what we were calibrating in that big balloon.
Mm.
They also went to Kerala, where they wanted to get measurements on the fishermen with the high levels of norm in the Kerala area. And they went down to Morro de Faro in Brazil. One of Earl Eisenbud's graduate students had him down there.
Joyce,
That was the man.
what's her name?
Bob
Joyce?
something or other, I can't
Oh,
remember.
what was the man? Okay, well, another gal at Rio de Janeiro that's the head chief health physicist for the country, and she is a graduate student at Rennes. Joyce Feldman. That's her
Oh
name.
yeah, I know Joyce.
But in any case, so these did have a practical use, and
Oh, yeah.
other than what you were using them for.
They were taken around and using them in Public Health Service had these men's and women's underwear where they had little pockets to put the dosimeters into, and selected patients wore them when they were having their examinations done.
Oh, for the next program.
Yeah, one
Now,
of the earliest ones.
Tell me about the radiation surveillance network. When did you start working on that?
That was
along the way here.
Yeah, that was while I was in Rockville.
How early was that?
That was 67, 66, 67. The 2 years I was in Rockville, I worked with the surveillance network, which was 80-some air sampling stations and air and precipitation stations.
And located just around the U.S., correct?
No, not entirely. There were a number of them in South America, the Pan American Health Organization.
Okay, I didn't know that you all ran those.
Yeah.
I know that Hassel ran a few of those.
Yeah, we ran them. It was when I got there, they were using the the Staplex sampler, the high-vol vacuum cleaner motor with a sampling head.
Darn good motor.
And the biggest cost was replacing vacuum cleaners. I had one guy that did nothing but ship out vacuum cleaners, motors, to replace them.
They were still about the best motor you could buy.
Yeah, but we changed to a low bar type positive displacement pump, a Roots Connerville pump at that time, and those pumps went on, they were in use for 6 to 10 years. In fact, I came to the state way down the line in this story in 1992, and there was still one in use on the roof of the building there. And we also stopped using the rotometers. We were using a pressure drop across an orifice sharp orifice on a disc
Right.
to measure the flow.
Constant flow orifice.
Yeah.
That was an improvement that I think everybody went to right away as soon as they saw that.
I made the first one out of one of the Staplex rings, a piece of pipe, 4-inch pipe, and a 4-inch planchette, and use a carriage punch to punch the hole in the center.
When did you do that?
That was in that same time period.
Well, that was a productive time period. Now those 80 fallout monitoring stations were very important.
Oh yeah.
Because they told the world what was going on as far as fallout was concerned. And that data, as I remember, was published in a unique publication that we're all sorry doesn't still exist.
Radiation data, health, and reports.
Rad Health Data and Reports. You want to say a little bit about that? Because I know you published in that continually, didn't you?
Yeah, we published all the data we collected in that, along with all the data collected by the states that submitted it. I don't know exactly when it stopped publishing. I have in my basement from probably 63 through 66 or 7, something like that. It was a very good, very useful publication.
I think 68 to 69 is when it finally stopped. Very sadly. I mean, it was a sad thing. The government makes these unilateral decisions without really talking to the scientists to find out how it's going to affect things. Since then, you have a heck of a time getting this data. You have to go to 10 different places and you don't have it all.
The Public Health Service, or not, EPA, now publishes something called Radiation Health Data or something like that, that is put out on a quarterly basis, supposedly. It's also supposedly on their website, but the last I looked, it was some years behind. I bugged them a little bit about it.
And they don't have most of the Hassel reports,
No.
which are, in this day and age, probably the most important reports in that area that are being put out.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the most comprehensive.
I wondered a lot when the Public Health Service, or whether it was the cancer folks, were doing the radioiodine study several years ago when they were trying to figure out how much radioiodine wound up where. I just saw no mention of any of the Public Health Service data or the Radiation Surveillance Network data there.
Right, and in the early days, all the Hassel data went in there too.
Mm-hmm.
And all the Hassel reports were referenced in there.
Mm-hmm.
And now they don't seem to be referenced anywhere, which is kind of sad. So it's much tougher for environmental scientists in the health physics field today to get there.
To get the information.
Because they don't have that. And it seemed to me that you were very instrumental in making sure that those reports just came out, right?
My first acquaintanceship with computers occurred then, when we shifted over our data handling onto what was it, an IBM 1620 computer. It was about as big as this conference room and had 20,000 byte capacity. And the data were being put in by key punch. And one of the things I did then was put it on to optical scan, so the data could be scanned and done faster. Of course, now you can put something that size in your wristwatch.
So that was very valuable experience, though, wasn't it?
Definitely.
Working with all that fallout data from around the world, actually.
And it was a lot of political hassles involved with it, the Pan American Health Network particularly.
How so?
Well, in the sense that I remember at one time I managed to match spectra that were taken in Guam and taken in South America from the same weapon system. Well, Guam's north of the equator. And I thought it was interesting that we were able to, that was a French test as I recall, be able to see the same spectrum, you know, from that test in different places. Went to try to write it up, and I was informed that I would have to have the written consent of every participating country before anything could be published on it. So it was never specifically published.
Oh, what a shame. Really is. Well, you moved on, and your Krypton 85 studies took a lot of years, actually, didn't they?
Right. I was working on them started in 68 at Rochester, 69, some of the earliest stuff, and closed out in 79, early 80. And the only reason it was closed out was the government was withdrawing support. I had a lot of useful things going on at the time. Primarily, things I was working on toward the end were induction of skin tumors in different species, you know, from whole body exposure. And the results were radically different between guinea pigs and rats.
Did you do pigs?
No. I didn't know why I hang a pig in my chamber. It was a little large.
Well, miniature pigs were often used because of the similarity to human skin.
Yeah, but I had a gore about one bite. I knew about that at the time. In fact, there was what was his name, Philip in New York, that was doing skin studies with mice. Very well known. My mind will bring it up sooner or later. One of the primary things I think that he discovered was the tumor incidence from beta dose was proportional to the dose at the level of the root of the hair follicle, rather than someplace else. It wasn't surface dose, it was depth dose, and I think that was something like 75 microns down, something like that.
It took us another 15 years to rediscover that in the NCRP publications.
But the rats developed tumors. They're very much along that line. Guinea pigs, I couldn't get to develop any external tumors at all. 40,000 rats first surface dose, and they didn't develop any tumors. A few of them died. Some dry desquamation, they lost hair, lost some weight, most of them just kept on trucking.
That's amazing.
Some of them a few years down, or several years down the line, developed a B-cell leukemia, which was really odd because chronic lymphocytic leukemia is not normally thought of as being induced by radiation. We tried to follow it up by another strain of animals. Those were done with Duncan Hartley pigs. We tried to do the strain 2 pigs that the cancer center had. Didn't get it much of anything. 3 years into the study, it was killed because of lack of money. So we never did see the end of anything, much on that. But anyhow, those rats developed. I saw as many as 12 or 14 tumors on a single animal. We used the protocol that we just left it go. Some people used a protocol that they took them off as they developed. We wanted to see what developed out of them. Got some humongous sized tumors on them. They were, what are the keratoid canthinomas that ultimately went to a malignant tumor. Some of them did, some of them didn't. But I had tumors as big as 300 grams taken off a 300-gram rat.
Ooh. Wow. Now, what led you in 1980 to go to become the Associate Director of the Experimental Biology Division at EPA?
Well, that didn't last very long. As Dan K. There are 2 left-handed, same-aged radiation biologists in the world from the University of Rochester. Dan Cahill was one, I'm the other. And I sort of followed Dan Cahill around for a while. He moved up to be the division director. I moved in to be the branch chief behind him. And when the fellow that was up there with him as the vice deputy chief retired, he asked me to come up there, which I did. One of the reasons that I did this was that money was disappearing. EPA was not sponsoring ionizing radiation research. I was living on an interagency agreement with the Department of Energy. They were getting to the point that the only people they were going to cover were people that were working in the national laboratory. So I sort of wound up having to do administrative work involving radiation rather than doing direct research work, which sort of, excuse me, there's Mr. Ken and Mr. Drewski.
We're still alive here, gentlemen. So
we're not the time here.
Keep going here. Well, tell me, what led you in July of 1980 to leave this assistant directorship?
Basically, I guess I got made an offer I could not very well resist. The people that were involved with the EPA efforts at 3 Mile Island came to North Carolina and twisted my arm and asked me if I would come up. And they discovered that they weren't going to get away with what they originally thought. They were going to have maybe a presence for 30 or 45 days, something like that, and they all could go back to Las Vegas. Why they were here in the first place is a whole other story. The people from Montgomery should have been here, but that's another story.
That always amazed me that the wrong people came during
there was a new organization in EPA. They didn't know what the radiation response plan was, and the administrator asked the deputy administrator, "Hey, don't you have a radiation outfit in Las Vegas?" And the next thing you know, the Las Vegas people were flying in, whereas the people in Montgomery had mobile vans and everything ready to roll up here.
Yeah, I was expecting the Montgomery people here, and they never came, from what I know.
That caused a fair amount of grief over the years. But anyhow, when they found out it wasn't going to work for 45 days and they were starting to have marital problems amongst the people they were assigning out here, they decided to make it into a quote-unquote permanent station. And I was asked to come up and run it, and my choice was, sorry, do I sit there in North Carolina doing administrative work for other people doing research, and I'm not going to be doing anything involving radiation for which I'm trained, or do I come up to Pennsylvania and do something, that's definitely radiation related? I had probably some misconceptions on how much good I'd be able to do. You know, I had this thought of a Pennsylvania native being able to get on a white horse and ride in and perhaps put oil on the troubled waters and things like that. Didn't really work that way too well. That's what led me to come up here. Also, I had 2 daughters in college at Penn State. My in-laws were at the Philadelphia end of the pike. My parents were at the
You have some
Pittsburgh end of
pictures
the
of
pike.
these children, by the way?
Oh, yeah, I have some here. You remember them now if I can find them. Children, where'd they go? Kids. Yeah, this is an early on picture. This was far beyond that period of time, or earlier.
How much earlier?
Oh,
It says 1969 on the back.
69, so that had been 11 years earlier. The 2 girls were at Penn State and the boy was in 7th grade. One of the other motivations of coming up here is he was in a school in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Your son?
My son, and he's taking his, the achievement tests, and he was getting 95th percentile in everything but English, and was 30 percentile in English. And it turns out that the teacher would send these things home marked up with an A or a B, and I could find 15 mistakes without even looking. So I decided he's either have to go to a private school or we're going to have to move, so we came up here. Talked to the school system up here. He repeated 7th grade, taking AP projects, and they gave him the worst, or the toughest English teacher they had in the system in Hershey. And it wound up, surprisingly enough, when he ultimately graduated from the Naval Academy in 1990, his major was English. Which I thought, of course, a degree from the Naval Academy is a degree in engineering with a subset of whatever else you might call it. But anyhow, our short little stay here in Pennsylvania, actually I thought I'd be here maybe 2 years. I was planning on retiring on.
And you're here, what, 8 years?
Well, I was there 8 years at the Public Health Service. I've been here ever since, but I thought this deal will be done in a couple of years and I'll retire. I thought I was going to get a job at the medical center and doing radiation biology.
Well, I remember, let's stop for a minute here, because I remember very well that it was maybe a year into the TMI accident when the only thing we had left in containment was Krypton 85.
Yeah.
And I also remember thinking, well, thank God we have somebody who knows how to measure Krypton 85 in the EPA, because that's what Bill Kirk did all his early PhD work on, was Krypton 85.
Right.
And I remember all those papers you gave at the Noble Gas Symposium, learning about absorption of krypton into fat cells and stuff like that. You really educated the heck out of the whole health physics community back then about that. Now, tell me about your involvement in the measurement, because we had to have environmental measurements of Krypton 85, and it's not easy to measure.
Well, the quirky part about that is I didn't get here until the day they finished the venting of the containment. But they were doing Krypton 85 measurements by...
Good old EPA timing, huh?
By taking compressed air samples, basically, but measured volume of compressed air, and then doing cryogenic distillation of the krypton out of it, and then using liquid scintillation to count the krypton. It was a very, very interesting method. Actually, there are 2 subsets of it, one of which had been developed in Montgomery and one of which was developed in the lab in Las Vegas. We were using the Las Vegas method, but I had a lady that came to work for me. She was there when I got there, actually, by the name of Charlie Smalls, who wasn't a health physicist. Her degree was in developmental biology, but she'd started doing monitoring work, and then they brought her into the laboratory, and she wound up running our laboratory. Learned all the stuff from the EPA people in Las Vegas. But she's one of the few people I've ever met that was able to master that witchy technique of cryogenic distillation of krypton. And she did that for us for the last several years we were there. But there was not that much krypton released.
That's right. Well, you were one of the few people that could measure it. I mean, everybody else was measuring zeros. And it was nice to have somebody that could actually measure the levels that were being released.
Well, the people from Penn State did it by a different method. They had a stainless steel high-pressure Marinelli that they pumped gas into and then measured it on a high-sensitivity crystal. And they were able to get some measurements which agreed generally with our measurements. side on that, some years later, I was asked to get down to Savannah River to make some argon measurements down there. They were doing some work around one of the reactors at Savannah River, and I borrowed Bill Jester's system to take down there and do that. And allegedly, the tanks had been purged. I didn't have time to purge them. I was sent down there very quickly. And it turns out about half our samples were contaminated with krypton from 380 from TMI because they hadn't been purged adequately. To purge those tanks, you have to pressurize them and put them under vacuum 3 or 4 times to get down.
And you didn't have Tom Jaruski's permission to move it out of the state, huh?
I could have gotten in trouble that way. There was measurable amounts of krypton in those damn tanks. But the argon came off all right. We were able to see the argon. The krypton, they wanted to check on that. Those didn't work very well. But we were there through the whole major part of the decommissioning up to the point that the fuel was pretty well gone.
And I also might add that your office was extremely helpful in pulling together all of the thousands upon thousands of environmental samples that had been sent out to be put on machine in Las Vegas. And if you remember, there were literally hundreds of errors that had to be corrected.
Which your associate John Sykes
but the thing
tracked down and.
Thank God we had you all to do it. In other words, there had to be a mechanism to do this. And the mechanism was to give it to you, and you got it done. Because when we worked directly with Las Vegas, it never seemed to work very well. But doing it through you, it happened. Now, I don't know what you did.
It didn't always work that well. There was one, for a long time, we were entering data on a remote terminal in Middletown. It was going on to the EPA computer at Las Vegas. Then it was transferred to a big DOE computer. The problem is there's only so much memory in the one in Las Vegas, and there was at least one occasion where a month of data we put in got pushed out the other end, and we had to re-enter an entire month of data. And we could only get in there between 3 and 9 p.m. our time, because that was when the computer was available. We eventually got our own computer and were able to do it better.
Well, anyway,
We had a lot of public meetings. How many public meetings? I don't know. I figured one time I went to about 200 public meetings of one kind or another, basically. Well, I guess they started out, I got here after the meetings concerning the pre-work on the krypton venting. Then they had a environmental impact statement draft that had to be explained to a whole bunch of people. We went around, and the state people and the federal people, and, EPA and DOE and NRC, Maggie Riley and Tom Jaruski. I don't remember who all else from the state went, but I can remember one down in Lancaster where we went down with state police escort. The cars were guarded outside the place, and there were police lined all the way around the auditorium. There were several hundred people there. The mayor of Lancaster was running the meeting. Stay peaceful.
there were a lot of charged atmosphere meetings. I remember those very, very well. Let's move on here. You after '88, you worked with EPA and ADSTAR through about 94 and 96.
No. I left EPA when I retired from Public Health Service in '88. At that point in time, the Hershey Medical Center took over the monitoring program on a contract, and the state was paying part and EPA was paying part. I think the first year EPA paid the whole thing, the second year they paid half, and after that the state was caught with it. It decreased down for a while. They were doing was tritium. There was a lot of interest in tritium being released from the containment during the cleanup.
Well, that was the thing that was left, of course, was tritium in the water.
Yeah, we were able to easily detect tritium at the observation center. It worked pretty well.
I remember we also found it under the BWST pretty easily.
Oh yeah. Yeah. What
Some
was it?
places on site at TMI, it was easy to find tritium.
Couple million picocuries per liter underneath that tank.
Yeah.
That's Mother Nature at work. Frost broke a line.
Yeah.
10,000 gallons or so went into the ground.
which is actually a small amount compared to the amount that
Oh, yeah.
had been generated. But in any case, tell me about your work.
Well, when I left EPA, I went to work for a company called Radiation Physics Incorporated, which is a privately held company. I don't know who all owns it. I know Ken Miller here at the medical center is one of the partners, and Lou Rubin. Their principal function in life had been providing mobile x-ray services to nursing homes and things like that, but they had expanded. They were doing some environmental work at the time. Got involved with doing some samples from up here from companies, not from the government. And that was about the time the radon issue was hitting the fan. They decided that we can't go into the radon measurement business, and which we did, and we spent about 2 years working on it. In fact, there's a picture of me in one of our laboratories
Holding a Lucas cell,
holding a Lucas cell.
which connected to a pylon detector, I believe.
Yeah.
That one.
We had, we're certified to use 6 or 7 different methods for measuring krypton. This was not that difficult to do. Or radon, excuse me. Oops. Oh well, they're both noble gases.
But anyway, it's
anyhow,
radon that you were mostly measuring.
we were measuring radon, and
And what made you go to work for the state?
we weren't making enough money to support me.
That's an awfully good reason to go to work for the state.
And actually, Tom Jaruski had talked with me some years previously about coming up there, and at that point, was about fed up with governments. My 3 years with RPI, I was about fed up with other things, so I went up there, and thought I was going to have a nice long spell working with Tom that I had known for a long time.
Well, he always had a good staff. I
and,
always liked his staff.
I got there, thing was set up, I think, in early December. Tom retired the end of December, and I came in January the following year. So I never did get a chance to work with him up there. But I did a number of different things there, you know.
Environmental surveillance is what I remember.
Environmental surveillance, I helped with some of the stuff with the krypton. I got the krypton grant working fairly decently before it went over. The people that were in radon had never done any of that sort of work.
Now, you and I worked on a project called Queen Hannah. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because you must remember.
Really?
You must remember that.
Well, when Maggie Riley, let me step back a notch. Maggie Riley, who had been in charge of the environmental and emergency response issues in the Bureau, retired in 1990, end of 94, and I got stuck in to replace her until they reorganized the Bureau and that division went away altogether. But anyhow, Maggie had been the Bureau of Radiation Protection contact for the cleanup of the facility at Queehana. Now that was up in Clearfield County, out in the middle of nowhere. It's about 5 miles from the nearest human being. You're more likely to hit a deer than see a human being, most areas out there. It had been built in the late 50s. Late 50s was...
Yeah, late 50s.
Trying to remember exactly. Anyhow, it was built...
Bill Martin Nuclear Division.
Yeah. Initially, it was built to do research work for the Department of Energy, having to do with the development of nuclear power aircraft and a couple other things. They built them, and they were testing reactors and testing fuel in their main facility, which had a swimming pool reactor in it. They did different tests. They had some hot cells, 6 hot cells, where they could handle highly radioactive material. And this went on for maybe 5 years or so, and then they bailed out, gave
Sold
control
to
of it, gave...
Arco, right? Yeah, what?
Sort of. It went to, control of it went to Penn State, running the thing. And then Martin Marietta came in to use the facility, for the hot cell facilities, for making the radioisotope heat generators, the snap reactors, generators for powering things like ocean-going buoys, remote weather stations, things of this nature. They were made using strontium-90 as the isotope. They would get the isotope in a big cask from Hanford containing some millions of curies, I believe, at the time. Their licensing was for 5,000 or 10,000 curies. Or was it millions of curies? Millions of curies, excuse me. But they brought it in there and ran it through a system that they devised and converted it to strontium titanate and pelletized the stuff and put it into
highly insoluble,
which is, you know, almost not soluble. But in the process of doing that, they worked until 1967 doing that, from 60 to 67. They left. There was several surveys done. Allegedly, the place had been cleaned up, and it was, I think you could say, cleaned up to the standards of the time for an existing, continuing running radiation facility. The standards that we have today had not been conceived of as far as being, you know, clean enough to eat your dinner off the floor without getting any radioactivity in the process. They were replaced by ARCO, NUMAC, who were using they took the reactor was taken out of the swimming pool and a big cobalt-60 irradiator put in. And they did all sorts of experiments with high-level gamma radiation there, including dosimetry and food irradiation and wood. And they ultimately developed a process for making fluorine using wood that had been impregnated with methyl methacrylate plastic under pressure, and then irradiated with a couple 100,000 rads of cobalt radiation. You got a material that would last 50 years or so. People walking on it, you beat on it with a hammer, it's not going to damp things like that. It's very handy. They decided to close up.
they being ARCO.
ARCO. Wait, I've got my dates wrong. Martin Marietta left in 1960. ARCO came in 19... I'll get that right yet. 67. I can't read it. I wrote a paper on this about 2 years ago.
He says Curtis Wright.
Curtis Wright.
Curtis Wright was the original. From Curtis Wright to Martin Marietta. From Martin Marietta to ARCO NUMAC. And when ARCO NUMAC left in 67, then a company called Permagrain Products was formed by employees of ARCO NUMAC, which took over the wood process and have been there ever since making fluorine. Along about the late 80s, the NRC got onto this kick of getting things that weren't being actively used cleaned up. The hot cells there were not being used, so they wanted them decommissioned. The state got involved with it at that point. Well, the state had been involved with it all the way back to 67 when we got title to it. I'm sure Tom Jaruski will have a lot to say about that, but at any rate, we had to do a cleanup of this place, and we found out to our dismay that it wasn't nearly as cleaned up as it had been led to believe. We had a preliminary survey done which found gamma dose rates in a hot cell up 400 or 500 R per hour from cobalt-60. There was beta dose rates that we measured that were at that point that were something of the order of a couple 3 rem per hour. We went through that, the whole contracting business, and hired a contractor to go in there and clean up. An outfit that's now NES Scientech. It was NES at the time. Got the contract, and they went in and they did a lot of cleaning up, a couple thousand curies of cobalt-60 and various pellets, rods, microspheres were removed from 1 or 2 hot cells entirely remotely, done by people using the remote handling devices.
Sort of amazing that nobody seemed to quite know these existed, and then all of a sudden they turned up.
Some of the things weren't on the inventory that we
They
knew
weren't.
about.
They weren't on any inventory known to mankind, but sadly the state ended up paying for those.
Those were taken away. All that stuff was taken away and taken down to South Carolina and disposed of. And we went on with the cleanup of most of the rest of the contamination was strontium-90, and we continued with the cleanup on that. And one part of the facility where they had done most of the hottest strontium work had it's a sort of a cell within a cell. They had a process cell within a hot cell, a hot cell within a hot cell. And it turned out to be, it was more highly contaminated than thought. But we were going ahead and working on it, and first we had a little problem with, we cut loose a piece of tubing, managed to spread something like I think the estimate was 100 millicuries or so of strontium in the high bay area, and that had to be all cleaned up. But then caused a substantial delay, a lot of fuss locally, a lot of TV coverage, a lot of political hassle. But as we went on with that particular hot cell, they got down inside it from above. It had to be entered from above. There was no direct entry. They were down there taking things out, measuring, doing surveys, and happened to pass a meter across one disconnected tube when they took the cap off it.
Quarter-inch tube, by the way.
Yeah.
Quarter-inch stainless steel tube, small tube.
The measurement was roughly between 40 and 50,000 rad per hour beta.
And this is where people are, too.
And this is where people were going to be.
This is not the highest number. This is where a number of an occupied number.
Yeah, well, this was in that cell where they'd have to be working. They'd have triple.
But they were in there.
Triple levels of decon clothing. But at this point, it was decided that to finish this up, it'd have to be done remotely with using robots.
Yeah. Well, the potential for having airborne material was very significant.
It was very high.
It was not low-level potential.
That strontium-90 bounced around like fuel fleas, I think was your word for it. But that project is still ongoing. It's probably in terms of radioactivity removed, 95% plus is removed. We know of something between maybe estimated 100 plus or minus curies of strontium in various parts of that process box that have to be moved, have to be taken out.
But when it seems to me when the state took over the whole license, they had no idea that even existed.
No.
And they were told the place had been cleaned up to where they didn't have to worry about any kind of.
Supposedly the whole system had been flushed out, and all the bad stuff was gone.
And so this all came as a great surprise to the state.
It was interesting though that when the state went back to some of the previous folks, they discovered a contract that Martin Marietta had with the government that essentially said the government would take care of paying for any cleanup that they got held responsible for. So allegedly, we are going to collect some of that as part of that money from the Department of Energy someday. What these latest terrorist issues may have done to that, I don't know.
Well, Bill, you retired recently from the Pennsylvania State Bureau of Radiological Health. How recent was that?
July.
Okay, so it's last year. So you are a new retiree.
New retiree, and my wife's keeping me extremely busy. We spent the last 5 months out in Pittsburgh while she was recuperating from a broken leg, and now I have her home. But
I'm glad to hear
she can't do anything much, so I'm doing all the.
Now, I think you have a picture of your grandchildren here. You might show the number of grandchildren.
Yeah.
You have a very productive family here.
3 kids,
I believe
6
it's in the very bottom
grandkids.
there.
Let's find it here. Oh yeah, this was taken at the beach summer before last. That's the 6 of them.
And you might want to show that one picture of your whole family. He certainly has a large family now that he's the
Well,
senior member of.
this was the whole group taking it. Several Christmases ago, there's 2 grandchildren missing from that one. They hadn't been born yet.
So you've been a very productive man, health physics-wise as well as family-wise.
Had, 3 children that married and had children, 6 grandchildren. It's one of them has 1 of them has 2, and my son has 3, all girls. He's a naval officer, lieutenant commander in the Navy. He's up at the War College right now. And he says when he hopes that he has a ship command or something when these girls get to be teenagers, because he'll be living in estrogen hell. And he wants to be able to go away. I think that comment probably ought to be cut before my daughter-in-law ever sees it. Although she's heard that statement many times.
Well, Bill, it certainly has been a pleasure for me to be a colleague of yours for all these years, and I've very much have enjoyed interviewing you. And I think that you've given an awful lot to the profession over the years. By the way, Bill's the number of publications he has is in the hundreds, well, publications plus talks.
Yeah, you had to add talks in.
And you're a very, very productive person within the profession. And the History Committee is very pleased to have this tape. And hopefully we won't chew it up too much, edit it too much, because it should be fun the way it is.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
You're welcome. My grandfather used to say,
Understood what the incredible stress was.
Well, that's, everybody
Major
got
players.
major settlements for health-related